Hey everybody, just glad to be here today. Going to talk about the budget debacle from EDL854. This is a case study that we've had for school finance, and I'm excited to dive into it. First off, I want to kind of talk about the contents we're going to go over in this case study. Number one, just talking about the summary of the case and what legal issues there are. Number two, just going to talk about the situation a little bit more in depth once we kind of go over the summary. Things that I want to just really point out what happened that I feel like are the nuts and bolts of the case study, and then questions that I personally have that I don't feel that were answered in the case study, and then finally what was important. Okay. Number three that we're going to talk about is steps taken to solve the situation, and these might be mixed in with a few different slides, but you can go through possible consequences, steps of development options, the best option, possible post implementation issues, steps that need to be taken, things that I could have done differently if I was the principal, and then last, just talking about the standard a little bit that we're trying to cover here and the conclusion. So, just talking a little bit about the situation that was happening in the budget debacle, you see that Carlos Santos is the principal of Briardale Elementary. He really feels that he's comfortable in implementing, things and making decisions when it comes to financial stuff with the school. If you look at it, the school district's pretty big. It has one high school, two middle schools, and six elementary schools. So it's not a small district, not like ones that have like 6 through 12 or different things like that. You can see that each elementary school has a foundation, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But it's really to fund supplementary curriculum, and these are most of the time parent led in this district. You can also see that a lot of times there's competition between schools to see how much money they can raise, and you can see Mr. Barley is actually going to be talked about quite a bit. He is going to be a Harvard grad that is in charge of Briardale Foundation. And then also, one thing that we're going to talk about is Mr. Santos. He explained the role of the president to this foundation of Mr. Barley, and then Mr. Barley also felt he could raise money for the school in large sums. Okay, I kind of want to get in the nuts and bolts of what the fundraising was about. And so I'm going to talk about some overall fundraising notes that I had. I also am going to talk about some reactions that we saw from some certain individuals, and maybe talk about some other ones that I'm not covering here, but also talk about some miscellaneous information that I think is very important to know as we move forward in what we're going to do to make changes and implement new processes and procedures. Just some overall fundraising notes is that Mr. Barley wanted to raise the most money. He had a fraternity brother at another school that he was kind of almost in competition with. Okay. The third thing I kind of want to talk about as a fundraiser was a basic fundraiser that you see a lot of, where they were selling raffle tickets, and in return you could win cash. Okay. The night of the drawing, you see that Mr. Barley was taken by local sheriffs to the station and booked and released, and after that he was convicted of a misdemeanor. Now, a few questions that we're going to talk about later is, what was, the essence of the crime? What was he getting arrested for? But let's go ahead and get into some reactions. Mr. Barley was surprised of the allegations, and Mr. Santos was embarrassed. Of course, Mr. Santos probably should be a little bit embarrassed because he is the principal of the school and he is in charge of the finances of that school site. And we've learned that multiple times that, the buck stops there. It was also on the front page news, so it had to cause a lot of different reactions throughout the community. A lot of stakeholders were probably upset with the foundation and with Mr. Barley himself, but also with some of the other officers of that organization who are also, invested in the sanctity of the community's money in that organization. And also, this just created a black eye for the Briardale Foundation, and we're going to talk about maybe some consequences of them later on here in the presentation. A little bit of miscellaneous information. You can see that no drawing occurred, from what I know of, because Mr. Barley was arrested prior to the drawing for money of the raffle. So that could be a problem down the road. Some other stuff is that someone tipped off the sheriffs, had to know something no one else knew. Maybe it was his fraternity brother. Maybe it was a frustrated parent that did not like Mr. Barley's standings on where the funds should go. That's one thing that was talked about in the case study, is that a lot of times, Mr. Santos was kind of hands off when it came to deciding where those funds were. Okay, so talking about legal and ethical issues, I put on here that there was no direct legal issues that have been indicated. Okay, none of, the only person that we saw get taken by the sheriffs was Mr. Barley, and it didn't say what he was getting taken to the police station for. It could have been for many different things. All right, but talking about some future legal issues are possible. If Mr. Barley sues for being uninformed on procedures and laws, maybe he was not able to. Understand when Mr. Santos was talking to him about what the procedures were and what maybe laws and processes he needed to follow. And then also, I always talk about setting precedents for future decisions is always something to look at. So we need to kind of look at what was the process of him getting elected, what was his things that allowed him to get elected. And we need to talk about setting some precedents for the future when it comes to situations like this. Ethical issues, not including other styles of observation, could cause some issues. You need to make sure that you're observing in a lot of different ways. And if you're not observing in different ways, that could cause some ethical issues. No involvement from upper administration. There obviously needs to be more direction to the site principals if these things are happening. Understand the importance of collaboration with stakeholders, knowing the laws of the community. Someone could have asked somebody like, hey, do we think this is a good idea? It sounds like Mr. Barley just kind of took it upon his own, and Mr. Santos was like, yeah, that sounds great. How much input did the principal have in the situation at the end of the day? Because he is responsible for anything tied to that school site. Follow up on plan of action to implement new changes is crucial to financial development. So you need to make sure that all those things are happening. So going over the final parts of the situation, I'm just going to read through these real quick. It's obvious that Mr. Barley had done something to break the law with the raffle. Mr. Santos also talked in depth to Mr. Barley about expectations of the position as president. The school foundation will be under a close eye by the district moving forward or be gone completely. Okay, like I talked about, some of the questions I had, was there any collaboration with stakeholders on the raffle? Okay, wide range of input. Did we get any input from students if they like this idea, from parents or community members? Is there any direction from the superintendent or the school board? Okay, was the process of fundraising discussed in Mr. Barley's orientation, or was it just like, hey, you're the president, so you got to run the meetings and come up with ideas, or was he directly trained on fundraising? How was the communication with the principal throughout the fundraising? Did the principal check in like, hey, how's the raffle going? What kind of money are we bringing in? Oh, that could be a problem. Let's go ahead and make sure that we have the proper, things with the community or, the county taken care of. Parameter of legal actions and what was the misdemeanor? Okay, and I noticed that I said, broke the law with the raffle, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he had a personal misdemeanor that he was getting arrested for. As a principal, as a principal, the way the school runs and decisions that are made about the students is a responsibility. Mr. Santos will be held accountable for problems and successes of student and faculty. This includes school foundation, student activities, fundraising, and other groups tied to that school. These are just a couple of consequences that I felt that could happen to Mr. Santos as a principal in Briardale Foundation. Obviously, both entities, Mr. Santos and Briardale Foundation, could go away due to this situation. Mr. Santos could get a lower level punishment, maybe a write up in his personal file, maybe a different position inside the school district where he doesn't oversee financials. The other thing about the Briardale Foundation, which I talked about earlier, is putting them under stricter rules of observation. And these are just a few possible consequences that we could see towards these two entities. So I wanted to talk about what Mr. Santos's steps to create a new action could do and the way that he needs to follow through. Through all the research that we've looked at, it talks about Mr. Santos needs to go in and do some research about this problem. He needs to audit financial statements, audit deposits of the foundation. He needs to, after he does all those, he needs to interview individuals. He needs to interview the people making the deposits, the people who write the checks. He also needs to talk to the foundation officials, probably not Mr. Barley as much, but the other people that surround him. That when that research is complete, you need to come up with some action plans. You need to communicate the finding with administrators and community stakeholders, such as the superintendent and people that donated money. Communicate with leadership groups from the school. Come up with procedure and policy changes for the future, and complete a review process to use to find future problems to change. And I think that's one of the most important things is that as principals, we need to understand that things are always changing, and we need to make sure that we are changing with those things and constantly try to do that. So my action plan is collect data in multiple forms, through interviews and, financial data, baseline hard data with numbers. Make sure I listen to students and stakeholders for feedback. These students are the ones that are going to be getting that money from the foundation, so I want to hear how they feel. Have conversations with teachers and peers about collaboration and foundation and quality through fundraising. Find out, what are some things that we can change. Keep in constant communication utilizing technology while maintaining a high level of school level governance. Number 5, make sure to show my findings and show how this level of education is needed for the success and well being of students and adults involved. I think the case that we're looking at here is just that there was not enough education to the foundation about things that they could do or things that they were not allowed to do. Some pros and cons. Collaboration always brings the best outcomes. Use of professional learnings to encourage proper financial spending equality, or equity, something we need to do. Continue education on fundraising through learning about different forms to provide students and teachers. Goals of the fundraising will be clear and precise, focusing on current and future success of each student and adult involved, and we're going to get into that next. The biggest thing about my action plan is you got to have collaboration. So if people are one-sided or have their own personal interests, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to do that. Sorry, I did not see that was there. But last but not least, all parties involved must be okay with change and implementation of work. A lot of times you see these parent organizations, they've been stuck in their ways for a while. So that could be one of the hardest ones to do. And then also these new processes that we're going to do are going to take some time to implement. Okay, my action plan is to set up new and improved policies and procedures for fundraising. One of the biggest ones is set up a two-person system for depositing and reconciliation. I also want to make internal controls for the principal to check up on the fundraising efforts, and then monthly audits by the school financial secretary. I hope these things didn't say anything about those things being put in place, but those would be 1, 2, 3, and 4 things that would definitely help any sort of fraud or embezzlement, stop in its tracks or deter it from happening in the future. Talking about implementation, meet with leaders from the district and set up these new standards, get them in depth, go through our legal counsel, making sure that they abide all laws and everything else. Use up a collaborative group to set up consistent means to grade our financial efforts for equality, and then make sure organizational leaders are trained and knowledgeable of new policy and procedures, and they can do them in a timely task. Evaluation. My biggest thing that I always talk about is don't be afraid to revise a situation when needed. It is important to get input and feedback from organizational leaders and community stakeholders, especially when it comes to fundraising. Last but not least, I got a standard. I just want to talk about how the standard was kind of integrated here through new integration of processes and procedures. Using data, communicating, and be able to see where wrongdoing is happening, and if any laws or regulation are being violated. All those are going to be able to come through these new policies and procedures. We want to be able to prevent fraud. Obviously, our community's money is very important, and we need to protect it as much as we can. Okay, setting up new systems will help us develop a much stronger system of school level management to promote the well-being of our students and adults involved in our academic institutions. And I think all those are some things that are very, very important, when we talk about the standards for this course and, equality to our students, and make sure that they are the main thing that we're worried about. I think, talking about fundraising, we need to make sure that funds are getting used on our students. Well, I appreciate everybody, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great evening.